Hey everyone, good to see you back. I've just recently set up some bird feeders and a squirrel feeder in the garden to feed some of the local wildlife over the colder months of the year. And obviously I want to take advantage and do some photography along the way. So in this video, I'm going to go through the steps that I considered when placing the feeders, depending on the background, light, and where I'll be photographing from. I'll also briefly cover what food is good to get, adding natural perches, and a couple of tips for the photography itself. I'm also happy to announce for all the UK watchers that Happy Beaks are having a competition where you can win a bird feeding bundle. So be sure to check out the link below that will take you to my blog post and you can enter the competition. The first thing I like to consider when placing my feeders and where to photograph is my background. And I like a background that's far away and is non-cluttered. So my background, it's going to be the trees just behind here, and they're looking really nice right now. And they're also far enough away. Now a little tip for your background is to keep the background twice the distance of that as you are to the subject that you're photographing. That way it's going to be easier to blur out the background into that nice creamy bokeh. Obviously blurring out the background depends a bit on your equipment as well. Now in your background you also want to stay clear of brighter branches. You know, if I had white looking birch in back here, it might stand out. You might find that it really stands out in the background. So if you can make micro adjustments to change that background so you have less cluttered elements, the better. Now do remember though, if you don't have trees like this in your garden or natural vegetation, darker colors from fences or buildings or anything like that might work really well. If you can throw them out of focus, preferably with the 2-to-1 distance rule that I talked about earlier, you can still create some pleasing results, and it might look quite natural anyways. My thoughts about light for back garden photography: this is a perfect opportunity for you to try out different sorts of light. And I think that back garden bird photography like this, where you can control so many elements, is a perfect time to really experiment with the light. Really go out and photograph in bad weather and so-called bad lighting, because you never know, you might get creative, and if nothing else you really learn to see the differences that the light makes in an image, not just what you hear from other people. I've really found that sometimes I'll have awkward backlit in the middle of the day, the sun is quite high, but it might light up some of the vegetation in the back and it creates these kind of nice circular bokeh balls in the background. And sometimes I get the actual branch itself in shade, so I get nice even light on the bird. There are a lot of elements that can affect the image, so do experiment and don't just go out and shoot in that good light that you are told to shoot in, because this is the perfect way to practice. It is really important to get quality food. Some of the things to avoid are salted foods, and don't put out loose peanuts, hard foods, or chunks of bread during spring and summer. The parent bird might pick it up, bring it back to the nest and feed it to the young, who might choke on it. I do remember to clean out the feeders regularly to keep them clear of bacteria and fungal spores. I'll put a link to the RSPB, what they recommend, below. I'll put out a lot of different types of seeds, but I do really like to add some Niger seeds, because that can really help attract different finches here in the UK, such as goldfinch and siskin. Obviously you do need the kind of habitat nearby that supports those birds, because if not, you're very unlikely to get them if they're only found miles and miles away. Now, as you can see it behind me, I've also introduced this little tree trunk here, and that's really ideal for me because I get nuthatches and great spotted woodpeckers around here, and those are the kind of birds that would naturally land and walk down the side of this trunk. So if they happen to come by, they're very likely to land on this, and I can get some photos of them on this trunk. It looks quite a bit more natural because that's what they would land on normally. I also use this trunk to support my twigs, or the branches that I introduced that I want the birds to land on. And I've tried a couple of different things. I've drilled holes in it up here so I can actually just put the little branches in it. But the easiest way by far was to actually just drill in this little plank here, and then I use a clamp to just clamp in the different twigs that I want. I really like old gnarly twigs or branches with moss on them and lichen. They can really add a little bit extra to the image. I also like to get some branches that have berries on them. So right now I'll go for some rowan berries, something like that, and make them part of my composition. Fairly easy for me to just go behind here, set it up, and at the moment I got all the feeders kind of set up there, the bird bath and everything, but when it comes time to actually take the photos, I will take off all but one of the feeders, and I might even tape up one side of it so that the birds are only going to land one specific place. Big kind of metal bits up here, and the birds very often land on them. So I've experimented with taking the whole thing off, just hanging one feeder off the side here. That's still not ideal. They will land on the fence behind and on the top of the very top of the feeder there itself. But you do have to work with what you have. I found that the birds very often land on my twig anyways, but the more other stuff you can remove and make it as simple as possible, the more often the birds are going to land on the branch that you want them to. Now, once it's time to take your photos, it really depends on what kind of birds you have here. I know that for the coal tits that come here, and a lot of the other small birds as well, I can actually stand almost right next to them and take photos. They really don't mind. But in order to get birds like the great spotted woodpecker, or birds that are a little bit more wary, I do need to make a little bit of an effort to hide myself. So I found that even though it's quite a long way from the balcony to the feeders here, I found that with my equivalent lens of 600 with a 1.4 extender, I can actually sit very comfortably inside and take photos. But I can also use a pop-up hide. I use the Tragopan hides, great hides, and I can just pop that up in the garden if I want to sit a little bit closer. I also have a shed that I can sit in, or just hide myself on the other side of the garden. And again, you want to consider that distance. Try out your focal length and see if it blurs out your background, if you get a nice clean background, and if the birds are large enough in frame for you. What you'll see once you start taking photos of the birds on a branch as well is that different positions will look a lot better. Definitely stay away from images where the bird is looking away. I don't take images when a bird is looking away. It might be sitting on the branch and looking away. Now, an idea here as well to get them to look in your direction slightly more often is to put the branch a little bit behind the feeder so that the bird might be looking towards the feeder and slightly at a diagonal in your direction. That way you might get more often shots where the bird is at least looking slightly more in your direction. And those are the pictures that are often going to be more pleasing as well and more engaging when the bird is kind of facing a little bit in your direction. Now, a very good thing to look out for as well is get that glint in the eye. And even on a cloudy day, which can be great for photography, it is a very good idea to have the sun at least on your side, so a little bit behind you or on the side. You might get that little reflected glint in the bird's eye, because if not, the bird can look a little bit disengaged if you don't have that. Now, usually I tend to rely on my image stabilization in the field, but for this kind of project and whenever I'm in a hide, I do use a tripod, and it just sets up my frame exactly where I want it, and I don't get too tired holding it in place the whole time. Now, as some final thoughts though, my preferred approach to wildlife photography is out in the field, photographing natural behavior. But I do believe that setting up a garden feeding station like this and taking these kind of photos you can really practice and hone your craft and really learn from it. Don't shy away from garden bird photography just because it's easy or you haven't earned the image. I think it's an amazing way to practice. There are loads of great videos out there for garden bird photography. This is just a little bit on what I've been doing in my garden, and I will be using it a little bit in the winter. For this video, I've teamed up with Happy Beaks. They're giving away a bird feeding bundle. So check out my blog post below and you can enter with the raffle tickets. It's a UK business, so unfortunately it is only available to people in the UK. They'll be drawing a winner at random, and it's going to be a bird feeding bundle worth approximately £60. So do enter. These competitions are great to enter because there's not always that many people that enter them, so the chances of winning are often a bit higher than some bigger competitions. And best of luck to everybody who enters. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll catch you next week.